Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Can you hear me? New spot, new location. Also, I haven't got Wi-Fi yet, so we're on, the other thing. Data. Remember they started giving us all free data again in when COVID happened? That was nice. That was cool. I think it's the right time. Yeah, it's the right time. Good morning. Thank you for telling me that it sounds good, Chris. I appreciate it. Just wait for y'all to get here. So, y'all, it's been hell of a move, guys. Hell of a move. So my friends, actually people I met through Revolution and shows and stuff, lived in this apartment here right next door to my kids' school. And they decided to move out because they got a house. And so about a month ago, a little less actually than a month ago, they called me and said, would you be interested in our apartment? You still want to get closer to your kids? And I said, yeah, definitely. And so here you only have to give like 25 days or like, it's not even 30 days. It's like something like 28 days or something weird in Washington that you're moving. So they gave their notice and then let the landlord know that they had a friend in waiting. And I gave my notice. And so the talk, click, clock, tick, 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 tock started going and moving forward. And I was like, it'll be fine. I'll get to it, And as soon as I was ready to move, getting stuff together, I got the flu. And that was like, I didn't have the kids. And so that was the hard thing, is because I was planning on getting everything done. I had 5 days where I was like, I'm kid free. I'll get everything done. And I got this horrible flu, which I don't know how, because I didn't get it from the kids. Didn't have it. Usually it comes from the kids' school. Kids didn't have the flu. Nobody had the flu. So I had this horrible flu. I'm taking vitamins, taking the nose spray that's supposed to lessen the cold, the Z-Tac or whatever it's called, and doing everything. Taking one load a day in my car, still dropping it off because they were moving out. And as they were moving out, they gave me a little spot to drop stuff off. And but the sickness really put me behind. But I made it. It took me about 4 or 5 days and 3 vans. I rented a truck, and then I had to rent 2 more vans, just because of timing and everything. So it was a lot. It was a lot. I'm not gonna lie. I'm exhausted. I am exhausted. I don't know if this will. Let's see, because you might be able to see some of the boxes if I reverse the camera here. Let's see if it works. Oh, I did it for a second. Let's see if we can do it again. Yeah, so you can see there's like a drawer and some toys and some Christmas trees and a vanity light and a picture by my friend Barry Taylor, who you might know as UK Bloke, and all the boxes and stuff are like. But I finally got built-in bookshelves and a picture my son drew of Godzilla. So, yeah, cool, huh? Oh, here I am again. So yeah, here we are. The dream we all dream of. So I made it. I'm near the kiddos, and I can walk them to school every morning, which I've got to do twice now, and pick them up from school, we walk, and it's awesome. It's a little bit more expensive, which is kind of scary, but I'm also not spending so much money on gas because I was spending about $300 a month on gas, coming back and forth because the kids had all sorts of lessons and things they did, and picking them up from school was just like killing me in my time. So I think we got close to even it out. So I'm going to try to avoid any conversation, any conversational, any why can't I think of the word? Controversial, any controversial topics for the next couple months until I'm sure I'm in. I'm cozy. It's so funny every time the landlord, because I'm such a pessimist. Every time the landlord called me, I was saying, "Oh, this is going to be him telling me I don't have it," you know. And it was just him like, "Oh, remember this? Oh, remember that." So anyway, here I am, and I wanted to give you that update. So there you go. Today's talk. Boom. I couldn't find my normal Bible or study book because literally everything's in boxes. And at the end of a movie where you're just like, oh, who cares? We'll just, this box will just be a potpourri of things. And I'll tell you what, taking apart an IKEA bunk bed, we had to get a new one. Their mom, as a housewarming gift, bought me a new IKEA bunk bed for them. Because I was taking it apart and I was like, there's just no way in hell this thing is ever going to go back together. Is a form of torture. I think building IKEA stuff by yourself and dismantling it over and over again might be a level of hell. I'm not sure. I know walking through IKEA and then having to pick stuff out at the end, it will be a level of hell, but maybe the darker, the seventh or sixth level, or the ninth level. There's a level of hell that's so cold that the devil is blue, and that's where Duke Blue Devils come from in Dante's Inferno. That there's a level, it's so, because it gets so hot, it reverses back into cold. So you learn things by watching Revolution, don't you? And look at that. It'll be a cold day in hell. Well, when you say that, it's literally, that's just a very deep level of hell. One of the things I wanted to talk about is, a few things, but arguing well. I've had a few chances to do that, and one was fairly big. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today, because I think that comes up in every talk. Like, it's always at least just like a little, like we mention it and kind of sew it into the work we're doing here at Revolution. But it's something that I feel like I've got a chance to kind of practice this past few weeks while moving. So why I thought it would be interesting to talk about this is because it was kind of like, for me, moving is a trigger, because I grew up when we left our house, my parents' house. They owned a couple houses, but our main house that I grew up in was owned by the church. It was the parsonage, so we had to move when they lost everything and everything went bad. And that's just always been a really dark memory of my life and moving. And we moved a lot during that time. It was like my parents couldn't get settled. It was like they were completely lost, and moving stressful anyway. So it was definitely kind of triggers me. And doing it on your own sucks. Sorry to be and this isn't about complaining or saying feel sorry for me. It's just about the reality of life, is that life can be really tough sometimes. That's just the freaking reality of life. It's like, we're like, oh, cry me a river, or whatever. And it's like, no, sometimes life sucks and you got to talk about it, and sometimes some people are better at being like, oh, this, God closed the door, but I closed the door. Somebody closed the door, but God opened up a window. I'm like, the door closed and God opened a window, but there was a brick wall someone built in front of that window. I get it. I'm not always the most positive person in the world. I think that's why some of you like me. And you have to deal with that. I was told that this week that I'm a bit negative, that I don't always see the bright side. But as I believe it was Cornel West said, I am a prisoner of hope, and will stay there as a prisoner of hope. So I'm learning to be okay with just Jay, and I hope you guys are learning to be okay with what you're dealing with. But so that's where today's talk kind of comes out of, is like this chance to have these tough conversations while being under stress, and how I did, and how are you doing, and are we doing this well? Are we arguing well? So all of these people I knew. So let me just preface this by saying that when you're arguing with people and arguing well, I think it's even harder. I do. I think it's harder because there's all sorts of things there. There's memories and triggers and past things, and there's feelings, and there's love, and there's all this shit you got to deal with. And I've talked a lot about boundaries as well, and having boundaries, especially when I talk about like having boundaries with my father. Like me and my dad, like didn't talk for like almost 4 years now, and having a boundary, but also with that boundary having a door with that boundary, and having windows, and all that stuff. So like kind of leaving the door open, like, hey, I can't reach out anymore because it's so disappointing and it's so hurting. It hurts too much to be just denied and not, so I'm going to just say, hey, the door's open. And that sounds really good. And I've said it to you guys before on this. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got a call. Hey, the door's open, man. I'm here. Ball's in your court. Sounds awesome, right? Until they decide to come and like be like, hey, I got the ball. Let's play. Let's have a tough conversation. Then you go, oh shit, this is the stuff I've been talking about. And what's the story with the art? The story is I'm giving a talk right now. It's from Belfast. A lot. So I talk a lot about boundaries and leaving the door open. And so one of the things is I'll say first is the first one happened a few weeks ago, and I kind of mentioned it a bit in the talk. And it was like just an interaction, social media interaction with an old friend of mine over politics. And I had posted something that I didn't really research very well, and they had really researched it, and we are not on completely different ends of the spectrum. It's just different places politically in some ways. So it didn't go so well at first. Like I was really defensive, and I was tired because I was just, starting to move and transition in my life. And we argued about this stuff, and I had the kids, and I said some things that were kind of ugly, and they said some things that were kind of ugly. Ultimately, I took the post down saying, listen, you're right. I need to look into this deeper. And I did. And I didn't feel like much had changed. And we talked about that a little bit, my opinion about the ideal. And they still very passionate about it. And basically, we just had to leave it at that. So I don't want to say we had to agree to disagree. It was just we were both where we were. And that was it. And to me, and I think to them, the situation wasn't worth enough to continue to argue about, or like it wasn't a big enough fish, like it wasn't going to change political history or the world or anything like this. It was just a disagreement that we were both passionate about that connected to bigger disagreements. But we just kind of left it there. And now we're back to kind of just being friendly acquaintances again. So that was the first kind of trying to argue well. And I will say, I feel like got more of like, a B plus, and I got more of like probably a C plus because I went quiet for a while, but sometimes you have to. So maybe let's just give it a D because self-care will take away the minus for the self-care. So it didn't go great. So anyhow, in the middle, getting ready, then the move. Boom. All right, kids are out of town. I get the flu. Oh shit. What? I got the flu. I can't barely get out of bed. I don't want to do anything. I'm so mad that I have the flu. Usually it's like, oh, I get to sleep all day and watch funny movies and take, vitamin C and drink Gatorade and eat saltines. But this was really frustrating because I was like, the kids aren't here and I need to pack boxes and I don't even feel like I want to stand up. But I finally kind of got myself together, and I used to get my iced coffees, still do sometimes, at McDonald's because they're cheaper. So I went and was getting my large iced coffee through the drive-through, and I'm always embarrassed to answer my phone when I'm going through the drive-through at McDonald's because I don't want to be like talking to them like, yeah, and can I get a Mc coffee, please? And blah, blah. Oh, you're at McDonald's. Oh, being healthy, all that, stupid stuff. So the phone rings. Now this has happened before, and it's my dad. Now my dad had a period of time where he would call me and I would answer and he would never be there. So it was like a butt dial. Like I was constantly getting like these phantom phone calls from my father that I was like, oh, it's not really him. And so the phone's ringing and I'm in the drive-through and I'm looking and it says dad. And I'm like, oh God, what am I going to do? Is this a butt dial? Is this really him? Should I answer it? And they're like, $2 for your coffee, please. And yeah, and then I next go pick your coffee up, and the phone just stops ringing. Now remember, this is all in the kind of the idea of how do we to argue well. But like I said again, when it's family and it's personal, this is something that's got every bit of history, every hour, every minute, every day that I've lived built into it. So I get my coffee and I go in park and I'm like, something just felt like this was different. Like this probably wasn't just a call. And so I called back and my dad answered the phone. And he's like, hello. And just started talking to me as though no time had passed. I'm not going to get into the details too much because it's personal stuff, but I'm going to what I feel like is worthy of like teaching here of like what is grace, what's grace shining in these moments, what is joy shining in these moments. But this is a big deal because you guys have heard me talk about my estrangement with my dad. Like, it's a bummer that a lot of you aren't here live today because I'm sure it would be interesting to hear some of your comments and questions. But still, podcast, whatever, watch it later. Tell your friends about it. It's also weird, like side note, is Pat Robertson dying this week and everybody being like, ding dong, the witch is dead. And oh my God, Pat Robertson's dead, And I'm watching all this stuff going like, this is probably going to be a lot what it likes when my father passes away, is a lot of people saying a lot of shitty things. And, and so in my mind, I was like, it's really weird that we like celebrate when these people we don't like die, because they hurt us, but we're not hurting them because they're dead. We're just really hurting their loved ones who may have had complicated relationships with them by just reminding them of what a horrible person we thought their loved one was, by celebrating it publicly, like, and everybody's like, oh, they deserved it. Well, we all deserve something. But grace is not about getting what you deserve. And that's the sucky part about grace and Christianity, and following Jesus is, grace isn't necessarily about getting what you deserve. And it's unfair. And it's, grace is anarchy. It is what it is. But anyway, the world goes on. Life goes on. I'm not going to change that. That was this Pat Robertson side note. But my dad and my mom got their start doing their children's show for Pat Robertson. And one of the funny things that always really stuck to me, like if you go like, well, Jay, Pat said this and this, and don't you, I have a reason to not like Pat as well. And when my parents left my dad started the 700 Club. My dad actually named it. Pat just was the owner. And then Pat took over when it started getting a lot of viewers. But also, my parents did this children's show. And my dad agreed to do the children's show if he could do a late night show called the 700 Club. And that's how the 700 Club started. It was kind of a Johnny Carson type show that my dad started, interestingly enough. But my dad's parents did this children's show. My sister was like, a birth announcement was on the show. And it was like, a howdy doody show. Susie Moppet and Allie, and they had these puppets, and Jesus loves me. Oh, why? I've been bad. It's okay. Jesus forgives you. That kind of thing. And so when they left, one of the people, maybe Pat, something got really mad, and they had like a couple years of tapes of this children's show that they made, and somebody at the church just thought, screw Jim and Tammy and screw their history, and went through with the magnet. This is when everything was on tape, and just erased all their work, all their history, all the preparation, everything they did. They handmade the puppets, they handmade the sets, they wrote the scripts. And so that footage and those times and all that stuff doesn't exist anymore. You might say, oh, Jay, that's not that big of a deal. But, when it's your family's legacy and they did something really cool and interesting like that, it's kind of, it always makes me think of like the pettiness of people, and the pettiness that even in Christianity, that when people get their feelings hurt, they do things that are really mean. And sometimes like you really need grace for that moment because it's unknowable. You can't fix it. You can't demagnetize something. You might be able to now. I have no idea. How do magnets work? Am I right? That's a insane clown posse joke. Talk about avoidance. So, hey, Dad. Hey, Jamie, how are you doing? And the iced coffee kicks in, and I finally am just like, where in the hell have you been? What? And that's not the words I use. They're words, much harsher words. I was very angry that I had not heard from my dad for many, many years. And so, and that my kids had not heard from my dad. I mean, we would get these random, like, weird, like a food bucket in the mail. And I would text him asking him not to do that. But I texted him a lot. I even texted him some music and stuff. And I brought up, and he said he didn't get any of that stuff. And I don't know if he's old or if he was lying to me. I don't know. And even this is personal stuff. And like I said, I'm just going to try not to get, throw up on you too much personally. This isn't a therapy session. But honestly, I don't go to therapy right now, so maybe it is. It was tough, and it was an honest, hard conversation. And he kept deflecting to our disagreements on theology, like, well, how is it you don't believe in hell? And how is it that you think this? And, and I tried to talk to my dad about, about like, good theology and scholarship, the importance of good scholarship. Are these scholars Christians, and what are they? Are they liberals? And I'm like, no, Dad, like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're a good scholar, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not a Christian, or if you're a liberal or you're not a liberal. Like, if that comes through in your work, by definition, you're a bad scholar, because you're letting your person, like being a scientist, if you're letting, your own, opinions and ideas reflect into these things, then you're not really, you might be good, but you're not going to be great. You're not going to be a good theologian. You're not going to be a good, teacher of like biblical history and things like that. Like, well, if you have a dog in the fight or you don't have a dog in the fight, you kind of have to keep some of that personal stuff. That's why I don't like apologetics, because apologetics is always by Christians trying to prove things because, for them, it's got to be right, and so we were talking about this stuff. And then I said, Dad, this is insane. Like, this is all a distraction. I want to talk to you about as my father. Like, I don't care that we don't agree on this stuff. I don't care that, like, you've gone crazy Christian right. Like this does not concern, is not my main concern. My main concern is we have not been talking. I have 2 kids that are the light of my life, and you're missing out. Like, just retire and become a grandpa. And that's where the direction we really tried to take the thing in. And by the end, I told him I loved him. He told me he loved me, but there was no great, like, I was like, basically, I attended a psychoanalyst. I saw a psychoanalyst for about a year and a half. And there were certain things I had to do to make this move to give up, and that was one of them. But I think we ended at the right time. And I think it prepared me for that phone call. Like, literally, like a year and a half spent preparing for that conversation. And so it was a great conversation, and not in the way that, like, it was, oh, we finally talked. But I got to say what I needed to say. But it was also hard because it wasn't restoration. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to get in the car and we're going to hang out and we're going to have a talk, he wasn't like, oh, am I going to get on an airplane and hang out with your kids? Not that that would be great either, because it would be really uncomfortable. But at the same time, you just all of a sudden you go like, there's really no great answer to the solving of this problem. And I think that's one of the things we have to keep in mind. Like, I always say that grace doesn't have an asterisk, but I think maybe arguing well or disagreeing well may have an asterisk on it, and a few asterisks for us to like go down and realize, like, oh, okay, there's just certain times where it's like the end is the end, and so for me, the end was, I got to say how horribly hurt I was, how sad I was. I got to somewhat hear where he was coming from and what his thought process was, even though I did not understand it. But I also knew that I sounded like I was speaking from another planet. It's strange. There were a few things that we agreed on, like about the media and stuff. But he didn't understand my work. He didn't understand like the documentary. He didn't, he finally started to understand and ask questions about it, but a lot of it was just too late. It was a whole lot that was too late. And so when you get that kind of closure, that's like, this is great, but a lot of it's kind of, it's too late. That's gone. I'm 47 years old. I'm a man now, and an old man almost, and I got these kids, and it's not too late for the kids, but it seems like that's just not in the wheelhouse there. Anyway, so arguing well, disagreeing well, and just like a hard conversation. I would give myself a good grade on that one, and the reason why is, and why I'm talking about grades and stuff like this, is just for the idea that I want you guys to think something. It was nice that he was able to call me. He called me out of the blue, and I don't know what that happened. So that was really great. That was really fantastic. I just saw something come up, but I can't. I wish I could read them all at once. If someone knows how I can read all the comments while I'm talking to you, that would be great. Please let me know. Or Josh. Let Josh or me know, because Josh, and we'll get better at it, because I think this is one of the ones where I'd like to be able to see more of the comments when we're talking. Interaction would be a little bit great on this. So anyhow, we had this conversation. It ended with the best way it could, but it's one of those things that wouldn't make a real great ending to a movie. It's not a storybook ending. It's not a biblical ending. Or anything like that. And it was sweet and sour. It was definitely contradiction. I'm so grateful to understand just a tiny bit of Hegel, because there was so much contradiction around it, because it was really painful afterwards, because it brought up so much pain and so much hurt. And I was really glad I got to say these things, but all that stuff had to be like kind of come to the surface. So I could almost like, it was almost like, too much foam on a beer, I had to, so all that pain kind of had to come back up to the surface, And at the same time, it was like that And then it was like dealing with that. And then it's time to move. And I called my analyst and I talked to my friends about it. But man, it was a lot. It was a whole lot. I took notes, and I should use these, shouldn't I? I one time had a guy on Facebook say, "You need to take notes, bro." I don't know. I like how I give impersonations of things written. Like that's how I heard it in my head. It might have been like, "Hey, man, you should think about taking notes." But no, it's like, "You need to take notes." Gargamel. So I left the door open and Dad came through the door. So what I'm saying is when you build boundaries and you leave that door open, that door may open, and be ready for that door to open. You know what I mean? So if you're not ready for the door to open, I guess build one of the boundaries without the doors or have a lock on it or whatever, but you need to think about it. Like, are you ready to have that conversation? I had used words that would have gotten me like beaten as a child because I got hit with a belt and a switch when I was a kid. And oh my God, like even part of me, I'm like saying these things like seriously. And I'm thinking in my mind, like, I can't believe I'm using this language to my dad, but I needed my dad to communicate with my dad. And then you would say, well, it's really cursing, arguing. Well, I think when it's a family member and it's personal and it's someone you care about and it's used to really emphasize something important, yes. Like if you're arguing well to your boss or to a colleague, maybe not. But I'm glad we talked. And honestly, like I look at Pat Robertson's death and I think about Pat Robertson and when Jerry Falwell died, I always think about these guys who like I learned what not to be from, and even with my dad, like I learned things about how to be a better dad. And there are things that were about him that were really cool that I've taken and used with my kids. But now I really communicate with my kids all the time. All the time. Like when they get older, they'll probably rebel and be like, he just communicated with me too much. But we sit down, we talk about our feelings and we talk about what's going on. So like, that's what we have to get. You get the cards you're dealt and you got to play those cards the best you can. You know what I mean? And that's what arguing well and disagreeing well is learning how to play those cards and embrace the contradictions within those cards, because that's how life is, man. Life doesn't always make sense. And there's just going to be contradictions we have to live with. And so rather than just being like, well, I play Uno, but everybody else is playing poker, you're going to kind of screw up at life. That's why we talk about arguing well and disagreeing well. Like if you're just going to be like, I don't play that game, because a lot of people are like, well, if you don't recognize this about me, then I'm not going to talk to you. Or if you don't, care about this about, like, I'm being like, I could easily say like, if you're not going to care about my kids, Dad, I'm not going to talk to you. And that's just it. And that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the way I did it, because to me, there's no constructive thing there. There's going to be no change. There's no hope for anything. That's just, it's over, it's done. And, there's a wall and that wall is impenetrable. And that's not how I think things change. That's because from my studying from Dr. King, Brother Cornel West, Gandhi, even Malcolm X, these are things, and now reading philosophy and even Hegel saying, when we argue, we recognize the other as human. These great thinkers have taught me, and Jesus and the Apostle Paul have taught me, like, to not, that's my thing. I'm not one of those people who just like screw it, because I'm like, I can't do a screw it because I've got kids and I don't want them to grow up in a screw it world, because hell, I'll be dead and gone, but they'll be here and I want them to be able to, not deal with the screw it world. Because it's easy to say like, well, I don't like those people and I don't agree with those people. But man, when you sit down with those people, like when I first started, I had LGBTQ friends, I had gay and lesbian friends growing up. But when I really sat down with some of my other friends when I was a Christian and I wasn't sure, it was a no-brainer. I studied the scripture because I was kind of legalistic in the beginning and stuff like that. But honestly, who cares what the scriptures say when you see what the humanity says? That's kind of the cool thing about the Bible for me, is that I feel like it's like love never gives up, never loses faith, never demands its own way. So it's almost like this kind of like, so which adventure are you going to choose? Are you going to choose that God is love, or are you going to choose that God is rules and regulations and in a box that makes you comfortable? Interesting, right? So so being ready, therapy, psychoanalysis, things like that, important to have in your life. Being ready for the AIDS conversations. I don't think I would have been ready for this conversation that I had with my dad a year and a half ago. Um, so a lot of people will talk about being triggered or things like that, and argue with me about like this is neither male nor female, no Jew, no Gentile. Like, how could you say that? You know, and they get really angry, and there's no safe place. And for a lot of those folks, I'm like, hey, listen, there's nothing wrong. You're just in a different place right now, and so you just kind of got to prepare for that. Like, I love sitting in bars, but when I first got sober, the first couple years, I wasn't going into bars. I remember going to one of my best friends from high school got married and had a party bus, and they were just hitting all these bars, bar, 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 bar. And I took my coin with me, and I finally just said, hey, listen, man, I'm going to sit on the bus. I know that sounds insane, but this is the one place where everybody's not drinking. And I'm just going to like have a Diet Coke. I think I had a Red Bull and had a panic attack. Like I was like, oh, Red Bull. Ooh, Red Bull and a cigar. Like, oh, I'm going to have a panic attack and shit my pants. But I did that, and now, like, if you'd ask me where my favorite places to hang out are probably like dive bars. I like to hang out in dive bars. Moving here, I'll probably hopefully find some of those again. Right now, I'll probably hang out in coffee shops. I lived in Linwood, kind of a projects area, kind of a poor neighborhood. And, it was Taco Bell and McDonald's and the mall, and everything. You had to drive to everything in the grocery store. So I spent a couple of past years of not doing much of anything, but kind of working on myself. So that's been great. And now I'm released into the public again. The unconscious is a weird thing. I remember talking to my analyst saying, like, I feel like I'm in prison. He's like, well, that's interesting. Your father was in prison, and now you've almost imprisoned yourself. And you go like, oh my God, the unconscious is insane. Read Freud. It's really interesting. You don't have to agree with everything, like you do here at Revolution. So then the third argument was it was also painful and hard to stay the course. So the third one is that I kind of took everything I just talked to you guys about, which I'm like, you might want to turn off and listen later because this is a lot of shit to deal with and hear about, a lot of sharing, and kind of put it on another friend of mine. And then we kind of had an argument about this kind of thing, about like just, I don't know. It was another argument, and it was another one that had history and personal stuff to it. And so I want to say again, like put this again, because I always say this over and over again with my notes. Arguing well with a stranger for me is the easiest and probably the most needed. Like, not cussing out a stranger or not telling a stranger because they're like, I remember when I was on a trip somewhere, and there was an airport, and the guy was like, vote Trump, fuck your feelings, and I was like, and I wanted to like, oh, why would you wear that shirt? Why would you, just yell and scream at this guy, why would you say F my feelings? You've hurt them now. Or this guy who was going the wrong way down the road the other day, and I lost my mind, and I was supposed to be taking my kids to swimming, and we yelled at each other, and it was stupid and awful and a waste of time. And so even in those situations, it's learning how to kind of be patient, argue well, and also looking at like sometimes that this too shall pass. But when you're arguing with someone you care about and he's been your friend or your family member, or even an acquaintance for a long time, you've got all this like, hey, let's argue. Got my baggage here. I have a truck full of shit right here. My boxes. I'm not just moving here. I'm moving to this argument, and I have it all with me. Are you ready? And I did. I pulled out stuff from like every bit of our history, because I was hurt, and they were hurt, and they were upset, and I was upset, and so, but like I said, arguing with strangers, I think, is so vitally important because we do recognize each other's humanity, and then maybe one day we'll have the adventure of arguing with them deeply about things. But so we can actually talk about the Great Divide, like, arguing well with strangers and people of other politics and other faiths and other ideas or not faith or whatever you want to say is important because there's this divide that the media continues to put in there, and that, all these big companies and corporations that don't give a shit about anything except like a few people being really wealthy, um, don't care about. And by keeping us divided, they stay successful. They keep us buying the other side sucks t-shirts and whatever, and voting certain ways and thinking certain ways and scapegoating one another. And we're all toxic. Oh, those people are toxic. But guess what? They think you're toxic. Maybe they don't use that word. Maybe they think you're a snowflake, because in their mind, that's toxic. So they're going, well, you're a freaking snowflake. You can't even blah, blah, blah. So we're both sitting there thinking that we're just right and awesome, and just completely dividing the country and making it worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. It's so much worse than it was 20 years ago. So, yeah, it's funny because someone just wrote, "Hey, the Lord is on your side. He really is," and that's great to think about. But then you're thinking, well, then the devil must be on their side. What I think is that God is love, and so there's love there, and love is God's love and the side of love, and so coming together and having the conversation, love is present. You see what I'm saying? That's where it is. It's not about this side or that side, that politician or that. Those can be great distractions, and a great example of that is my father. The argument with my father, as he kept bringing up theology and religion, and then politics, and I'm going, none of these matter in this situation as father and son. Those are all great distractions. We need to be over here. Dad, kids, blood, those are the issues we need to be talking about. And so with my other friend, this last argument, who is a very close friend, no guessing, and also really taught one of the people who taught me about arguing, really encouraged me to teach more about arguing well. But we did it. But it took time. It took a lot of conversations. It took a lot of texting. It took a lot of blowing off steam. It took a lot of hurt. It took a lot of frustration. It literally took us, like everybody talks about deconstructing, and they always get it wrong, but it really did take us dissecting different things that we were disagreeing about and finding a conclusion and finding a source of the disagreement. Like the disagreement was it seemed like it was this, but then we realized the source was actually over here. Now they were related, but they weren't the same thing. And that made a huge difference. Like there was some misguided hurt and pain. And then some really well-guided hurt and pain came out from the misguidedness, which was like, obviously those things needed to be talked about. So even arguing with something that might be somewhat misguided helped us to put some other things on the table that probably did us well by talking about. And I say this because humanity can be so frustrating and so gross, even when you love the other people. Like it can just, like you get your closest friends or your lovers or your, whatever. And when you're disagreeing and you're just so like, oh, how are they so gross? Why are they so different than me? And why am I so right? And that's just kind of gets into human nature. And you have to go like, hey, it's probably a feeling that's very mutual. And think about this stuff. And now this is all this stuff that I'm saying that just seems like redundant and blah, 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 is things that when you get into your next argument with a family member or someone you love or a stranger or things, are hopefully things that will just pass through your mind for 10 seconds and maybe help you direct your tongue a little bit. Like maybe you're going to go left instead of right, or right instead of left, you know what I mean? Or up instead of down. You're just thinking like, just help you motivate us to communicate with each other. And who knows, it might be one of us. It might be me that you're going to argue with next. I don't know, but like it helps us just to be better human beings, because right now it seems like that's kind of what we need as a prescription is how do we grow as better human beings? How do we understand each other what better so we can grow this world and make this planet safer and make this world safer from a lot of really horrible things that seem to be overwhelming us that we really need to talk about if we're going to change. And even at this point, I think there's things that we can come together and compromise over that would make the world better. Like, so hey, like if we're at least we're gonna compromise, like how are we gonna do this? And what's a good way to it starts with conversation. It starts with the disagreements and then finding your way to the where the disagreement is rooted in, what's it rooted in, and then maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's coming from somewhere else, and you're able to solve the issue completely. And that's the importance of arguing well. But a lot of ugliness, a lot of hurt, and a lot of pain come out of that. So, I feel like arguing well is like one of the, it's like it should almost like if you're an artist, you could do this. You could argue well and then like put it in glass and then like break in case of disagreement or brace in case of emergency or break in case of whatever political disagreements. Argue well. We gotta argue well because it's not. It's just it's not gonna feel great. It doesn't feel great. Like hopefully at the end it feels a lot better, but it's gonna take some time. It's we're going to argue well, and then there's a lot of things are going to be said that we're going to like, I'll never forget that, and you may never forget it, but it's going to lighten up, it's going to numb, and there's going to be more better memories for some of it. And then you have situations with like my father that might just be the end, but I'll know I spoke my piece to my dad, and I'll know at least where he was at, and I'll be able to have peace with that. So you see, there's different ways of different people and different situations that uh, that life leads us to, and so we have to learn to disagree well and show as much grace as we can. I feel like I was showing super grace to my dad? I felt like I was doing like college level grace in some ways because I was really having to say everything I needed to say. I had to give myself grace. And I also only knew that this was he had to step up and be a dad. And so I had to give him the grace to be my father at that moment. So my advice is hold on for dear life. That is my advice. Hold on for dear life. Because it can get personal and painful. And I'll tell you what helps. And it comes back, this is the family hour, right? Is what really helps is knowing who you are, um, and knowing, being comfortable in your own skin and being comfortable and being told like, one example is like, well, this wasn't even directly said, it was just kind of suggested is that everything you see everything negatively, and going like, that's okay because that's kind of who I am. I'll think about that, but knowing like, okay, this is who I am and this is how it's received with some people, but but this is a part of me. And so I'm going to be okay with that. Like that's a reality. Knowing who you are helps immensely. And I think that's why I always talk about the importance of my mom's book, I Gotta Be Me, is being who you are in the midst of that. Now, being who you are doesn't mean you're a dick and that you have to demand your own way and that you have to belittle somebody and that you don't move or you don't shake or you don't make, you don't listen and you're not willing to change. This is who I am and I'm not changing, so go to hell. It's not that. It's just knowing who you are and where you're able to shift and shape and move that, and see how it's effect on one person. And so, you might be like, well, I'm comfortable this way, but then you might be like, well, how does it affect this relationship? Oh, I've noticed this and I wonder if that's it, So it's just saying like, I'm open to learning and growing for the short time I'm here on this planet. So knowing who you are helps immensely. And really the rest is the negotiation, and not knowing, we don't know if it's going to end well or not. We might be having to do this as a generational thing, but it's, know who you are, and being open to negotiation, and having the tough conversations. And it does require deeply caring about people, and people who might even, it's, and sometimes that's not going to be replicated. You're not going to feel that back, and that's the tough part. So literally, this is all about the really hard parts of communicating. Like, I didn't get back like what like the magical thing I wanted back from my dad was, it wasn't like all of a sudden we were standing at Disneyland and I'm holding a balloon and he's buying me an ice cream or giving me a hug or telling me I'm good enough, or that I worked really hard to get where I'm at, and that I'm not lazy. Those things, just, they're not going to come. I have to learn to do work on those on my own and see why those things have affected me the way they have. So there is no magic, where there was no magic bullet. There are miracles once a life, twice a lifetime maybe, but that wasn't there. Um, but it also allowed me to, talk to him about my mom and just say, God, I wish she was here. So that was really interesting. It's interesting to see where these places take us. I feel like, I'm really fresh from all this stuff, and I'm really fresh from a move that, I tried to pinch every penny. So I did myself, and my back's just really mad at me and angry, and I'm exhausted. And I'm really surprised I haven't cried during this talk, because I'm so freaking tired and so exhausted, and everything's in boxes. Um, but I'm kind of really happy that I finished the move, even though I accidentally threw the keys into the dumpster at 11:30 at night, covered in slippery dish soap. So they're probably at the very bottom of that, and I'll probably get some ridiculous key loss fee that apartments like to give you to make sure you're not just, you know, giving keys out to everybody in the world. I don't know. Um, but that's the word for today. Hey, listen, if you want to support Revolution and what we're doing, there's some other stuff that came up too this week. Like, we had to deal with, I had to talk. Yeah, it's a long story. But the work of this Revolution can use too. We're doing a lot of stuff with Revolution, and trying to figure out where we're going business wise and all this stuff. And anyhow, but you can support Revolution by going to revolutionchurch.com, and going to the PayPal one, because we have been working months and months to get the Venmo one up. And Venmo, I don't know what's wrong with this company. We have jumped through every hoop they've asked of. I literally have hired people who work for us, who do all of our books and stuff, to make sure everything's above the board. I've actually moved a lot of that over to them to get it figured out, and we still have not got it figured out. So we've literally put finances into it, because so many of you have asked us about Venmo, because you're like, oh, I want to donate, but I don't like PayPal. And I don't want to write a check or whatever, and right now the address has changed anyway. So, um, and when you send a check, it's literally me going to the Revolution Bank and putting the check in, which is fine. Anything's fine, but PayPal is all we have right now, because it's been so frustrating to get Venmo to work. So that's my long explanation of why we can't accept Venmo right now. But if you're willing to sacrifice and go to PayPal, even though you think it's the devil, or that it's for people who are from Generation X, that would really help us. See, someone just recommended Zilla. So we'll also try that. It's really, honestly, still Revolution is just me and Josh. But now that I'm closer, and that there's a train that goes down to Seattle, maybe I can take the train. Maybe we'll meet some more people and get some more volunteers to help us get better ways for you guys to help support us. That's probably not the best place, to be behind on, is financial support. But also, my parents were known for raising money, and I don't want to, raising money for me has always been something I'm not. I mean, look how I'm moving farther away across the camera as I talk about it. But we do need your support to continue on and to make this happen, and to be able to even get the things to help us take support, and to continue to make this this show better, this weekly podcast better, and do more podcasts and do more talks and do more with the YouTube and all that stuff. It's not a lot, we don't have a huge budget, but it seems to be hard to reach. So we really do need your support. So I would ask you, like, if if getting on PayPal is something you could do for us, that would be great. And if you just say, hey, I don't even have money to go on and do a PayPal, then I would say, hey, retweeting, sharing us on your Instagram stories when the talks come up, putting links up to the talks really, really help as well. Even if you like know how to take a clip from a talk and put it up somewhere and put a link towards it, that's kind of stuff really, really helps, believe it or not. Sharing it on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and all your social media places, that also really, really helps. Downloading, leaving positive reviews, making sure that you follow us on YouTube and that you have a notice on and that you give thumbs up to all of the talks and things like that. All those little things also really help well to bring in more people so we can kind of stay fresh and do what we're doing. And I can continue to study and read and talk to people so we can get better at what we do. It's weird because it's like being a gathering, not just like, and having a church be part of that. It's kind of leading us into new directions. And so it's kind of like, where are we going, and figuring that out. And anyhow, thanks a lot. Thanks for listening. I'm puttering out. I'm exhausted. Thank you for your support, folks. I will hopefully be seeing you next week at Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time right here in Seattle. If not, you're going to have somebody else who's really awesome. And we have got some great guest speakers, hopefully in July. And I think they might both be interviews. I don't know. I think they might both end up being interviews with me and them together. At least one in July and maybe the other one in September. So I'm very excited about that. And some really brilliant, smart thinkers to be involved in this work and what we're doing. So thanks a lot, folks. Thanks for being a part of this thing. A lot of you have been around for almost 30 years. That just blows my mind. Lots of love. Grace to you all. See you later. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.